And this is Richard Nikoley, freetheanimal.com. And I'm on again with Noah Revoy, and from the website smv4k.com, yeah, which means sexual market value for K-selected, red-pilled K-selected people. And he can introduce that. Now, what's different here is that I talked to Noah, I guess it was about a couple of weeks ago, and we did something different where I interviewed him on his own show. And so that's on his blog. I will put that up. And then I thought, well, that was good. Well, now we're going to do it on my sort of quasi podcast video cast thing that I do every once in a while, whenever I want to, and I want to. So without further ado, we're going to be talking about agency today, and it's for men and women, and what men and women to avoid, and what is agency. So how you doing, Noah?
I'm doing excellently. Thank you for inviting me back. I think our last chat was absolutely exciting and very interesting. I think the topic we have today is perhaps the most important topic that we can talk about. It's something that's really misunderstood, and I think we can clear up some of the misunderstandings about agency in our conversation today.
Good. And to start that off, I thought it appropriate. Now, Noah has a very good post on this whole thing from soup to nuts, and I will put that in the links as well. So this hopefully might fill in some of the blanks and so on. I'm sure he has an understanding of what in his post people have the most difficult thing wrapping their minds around. And one thing is the very term we're using, agency, because most people tend to think of agency as what authority you have as an agent to act on behalf of someone else. Classic examples of, entertainers have agents, writers have agents, sports stars have agents, and really an attorney is an agent as well. They're often operating under some sort of limited power of attorney, so a scope of things that they can do on your behalf so that you don't have to worry about everything, and you're getting a professional who deals with these issues all the time. But when we talk about philosophical agency, we're talking about something different. So I'm going to give it to Noah then and let him the TLDR is how able are you to act on your own behalf as your own agent? So you want to take it from there, Noah?
Exactly. In fact, the two words are connected in the sense that when we have an agent, let's say a publicity agent, we delegate some of our agency to that person. So because they're an expert in a certain field, we delegate some of our legal agency to our lawyer. Our lawyer maybe can get into contracts on our behalf if we delegate that to him. And so what it is it's delegating our power or our authority over our own selves and our own lives, our ability, and power is a better word used than authority, our ability to master our own destinies. Mm-hmm. And often people ask the question, do I have agency, or does someone have agency? And that's about the same as asking, do I have intelligence, or does someone have intelligence? And it's not a binary. And this is the biggest problem, that people consistently look at agency as a binary. You have or don't have it.
Right.
The reality is it's probably looks something like the IQ bell curve. Mm-hmm. So the bell curve probably distributed similar to how the IQ bell curve is distributed, where on the highest end or the lowest end, there's very few people, and most people are clustered somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so when we talk about agency, we're talking really kind of. I'm sure you could everybody has agency to do the dishes, right? Pretty much, right? But so you're talking about a whole host of different things over which you have the power to do on your own. I agree. Power is a better word than authority. Everybody has the authority.
You can have an authority, but if you haven't the power to act on that authority, then your authority is valueless. It's
Great.
a false authority.
Yeah. Great distinction.
You know,
So,
sorry,
okay.
in the law, we recognize various degrees of agency.
Mhm.
And in fact, very often, for example, if you use violence in your own defense, the court will ask, would a reasonable person feel in fear of their lives in the situation you were in? What they're asking is would a person with average agency believe that it was necessary for him to defend himself in order to preserve his life? They're asking a question of agency. And it wouldn't make sense to say, would a person with reduced agency feel in fear? That wouldn't make sense. The person with reduced agency wouldn't even be charged with the crime. The simple fact that his agency wasn't sufficient to make the decision is enough to, he will still have some consequences. He might end up in an institution, but we don't give him the same consequences we give someone with fuller agency, with enough agency to make that decision. And the law tries, at least in wording, at least in principle, to be reasonable in how much agency it expects from people.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find very often that while the law tries to be reasonable, we often are unreasonable in our expectations of agency. And either we expect people to show much more agency than they're capable of, or much less agency than they're capable of. And if we really understand it well, a lot of that goes away because we can start to understand things.
Okay, so let's get this into the kind of context, which is your expertise, which is the whole relationships and dating, so on, between men and women. Excuse me. So what we need to do is narrow this down to the basket of agency topics that are specifically and most importantly applicable to all of this. So do you want to run down the list? I think it's like 5 or 6 or so, or 8.
So we have things which impinge our ability to exercise our agency. Some of these are temporary. We have knowledge limitations. So if we're ignorant of a situation or of how to deal with something, we don't understand it, it's difficult for us or impossible to apply our agency on that subject. That's something we can fix. Intellectual limitations, though, they can't be fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So there are obviously a certain percentage of the population that is low on the IQ scale, and we cannot expect the same we cannot expect the same level of agency from them. Also, children who yet have not developed their intellect to understand right from wrong. It's not just a knowledge thing, it's their ability to process that as well. That comes with age, various stages of life. We don't expect the same agency from children as adults. We don't expect the same agency from, for example, a wild animal that we expect from a person, because we obviously know there's a big intelligence difference. Also mindfulness. So that means the person's impulse control. And you can be very smart. If your impulse control isn't so good, what'll happen is when you're confronted with a situation of temptation, your brain shuts off and you just do. Kind of like an NPC. They just react to stimulus rather than thinking about what they're doing. And you can do something about that. Mindfulness meditation can help you to become more controlling of your impulses and increase your agency.
Do you have any specific recommendations in terms of this mindful control of some sort of meditation, perhaps?
Yeah, the very basics, the simple thing that you can start doing right now is in the morning, when you take your shower and you're done cleaning yourself, cold shower. Do a cold shower. The cold shower forces you to face something that is uncomfortable and to do it without too much complaining. You know, take that cold shower, do it until you feel comfortable in the cold, then turn the water off. And this will have a effect right away on your brain and how you feel dealing with discomfort, or dealing with your body telling you to do one thing, but you knowing that it's not going to hurt you and you should do something else. And another is controlling what you eat. You know, making your food something that you decide what to do, rather than it be completely on impulse. Most people eat completely on impulse. They go shopping, they buy whatever, they walk through the bread aisle, they fill up their cart with bread because, man, it smells good. You know, they walk through the sweets aisle and they buy all the sweets because it looks good. And then they have that at home and they just eat whatever is there by impulse. If you make decisions consciously on these very simple things, it will start to rewire your brain to be more mindful. And you'll get to a point then where you'll need even bigger exercises. And there's things like meditation that will help you to understand what's going on in your mind. Creating a calendar. For a lot of people, simply creating a calendar where they schedule out their week helps them to be more mindful.
Okay, so now the next thing after mindful.
There's physical limitations. So if you you said about dishwashing, well, imagine if the person is crippled and they can't get up to the dishwasher. So they have I want to do the thing I'm supposed to do. I know I need to do it, but I just physically can't do it. And that can even be old age. Sometimes our physical limitations can affect our energy levels, and we just don't have the energy to do what we would like to do. So that limits us. There's also instrumental limitations. So the number one cause of death for humans up until roughly the 1940s, 50s was waterborne bacteria. So we died from all kinds of waterborne bacteria. Our ancestors didn't want their children to die from waterborne bacteria. This wasn't an agency issue. They just lacked the technical capacity to protect them. We lack the technical capacity to deal with all diseases and illnesses. So we're always going to come up against barriers where we just can't do it. There's just nothing we can do about the situation. And so there is those limitations. There's also resource limitations. Especially for young people, they might say, well, I'd really like to learn something. And they're just incapable because they can't get a hold of the information that's necessary because they can't afford it. They can't go to school. Now that's been overcome largely through technology. You can learn everything online. But there's always some resource limitations to your ability to exercise agency. And then there's the impediments placed upon us by others. So if you're a slave, how much agency can you show? Well, you can't show too much agency or you'll get killed. If you're living in a country that's communist, you're basically a slave. You have a limit to how much agency you can show. And so you're better to just kind of delegate that to someone else so that you just follow along what you're supposed to do and shut up and keep your head down so you don't get killed. That also happens in any kind of a culture that's highly totalitarian. The people use less agency and they don't need it. And so it no longer becomes such a high evolutionary pressure on development of agency. This is why in our world, in the white Western world, we have a fairly high level of agency, is because there's been heavy evolutionary pressure on us to show agency. Men with low impulse control tended to get killed. Women with low impulse control tended to have less children. Women who were not sufficiently mindful to look after their infants had less surviving infants, and on it goes. And so that pressure had changed us as a people into a higher agency, in general, a higher agency culture.
Okay, so we've covered like the general swath of it right here. So let's start to break it down a little bit, and let's stay on the general.
Yeah.
But let's differentiate between some of the principal agency characteristics are of the Mark 1 Mod A female versus the Mark 1 Mod A male in normal Western culture, say.
Okay, so a really big question is, do women have agency? Now, we talked already about this, not a binary, so it's not a yes they do or no they don't. They're on that spectrum. But the women's agency spectrum is different than the men's, because throughout history, the jobs that men and women had were very different, and the evolutionary pressures on men and women were different. So men, we had to set the boundaries for society. That meant the physical boundaries. We build the walls. We would build the fence around the civilization. We had to go out and deal with other men. And that meant that we had to have impulse control, so we didn't start a fight that we couldn't win, or even just start fights and eventually wear ourselves out. We had to be very careful to make sure that we were managing our resources correctly, especially if you lived in a harsh climate like Northern Europe. You had to have discipline to set aside a certain percentage of your grain for the next year and things like this. And this, men with higher agency not only were more successful, they tended to rise in society. Even today, you won't find a low agency man at the peak of a social hierarchy, because he's not respected by other men. In fact, his level of agency often helps him to achieve that rank within the social hierarchy. Women, on the other hand, had a very different situation. Throughout history, in general, women's sphere of influence was geographically very limited. They would stay in the village. They raised children. They followed the rules that the men put in place to keep them safe. And if they needed something outside of the village, the men would go get it for them. And so their agency, level of agency, was optimized to be what would be just right for raising children and for pleasing men, basically, picking the right man. And in Western culture, we gave women a lot more choices. They essentially, fathers would present potential suitors, and they had a veto power over it. So they had some agency to veto which man they wanted. And so that level of agency, women are very well adapted to. The problem is, in modern society, fathers have said, oh, just do whatever you want. Well, they're maybe not even there. And society,
now we're getting into the good stuff here.
Yeah. And society has given women a lack of rules. There's no rules. And when there is rules, it's often a moralizing that even women recognize is not based in reality. It's something based on shaming and these types of things. And they know those tactics well, because that's their primary way of getting what they want. But what's happened is we've said to women, you can do everything a man can do. And they said, but we don't want to.
Yeah.
We don't want to. And then men said, no. We have created an egalitarian culture. We've erased differences between men. We are now all relatively equal. And we're going to erase differences between men and women are rebelling about it. The bad behavior that we see in women today is a rebellion against men's failure to benevolently dominate them.
Mm-hmm. That's, benevolent domination, yes. But it's natural, right? Yeah. Because, when you look at this and you look at the way things used to be, typically, I mean, for women, they were always under some sort of power of men. It was from fathers, and of course they had grandfathers and uncles, and then the point in time came where the men, I'm sure with input from the women as well, but there was basically a handoff to an appropriate husband. And then
very often older women in the village had a big say over it, because their job was to look after the next generation. And they were often the oldest ones in the village, since women lived longer than men. And they would check out. Fathers would go to the old ladies who were the matchmakers and say, what do you think of so-and-so from the neighboring village? And they would say, oh, he's a bad boy. He looks okay when he comes to church, but secretly he's an alcoholic and doing whatever this and to sheep and whatever it is that they're doing up in the middle of nowhere. And the father would be like, oh my God, well, I'm not going to recommend my daughter date him. Now, Westerners, we always gave our women a lot more say in life than, say, people from the Middle East or people from Africa. However, we also, it wasn't near the level that it is today. And the change was sudden.
Yeah.
Before the Second World War, women had a great structure. Even men had that. Men have had that loss of structure as well. And we see that with young men today being never growing up, having this Peter Pan type thing, going MGTOW, not because it's a rational decision, but because they really don't have a choice sometimes. Sometimes it's a rational decision. A lot of times it's no choice. We see the incels are the result of men having no structure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to cover some points for people who are watching this thing for this sort of thing for the first time, MGTOW is men going their own way. Basically, men who have decided, look, I'm done with women, at least in any sort of long-term relationship, right? And then you have the incel, which are the so-called involuntary celibate, which I maintain isn't really involuntary celibacy. It is more It is more the fact that they don't have the ability to gain the true deep love and affection from a female. It doesn't mean that they can't get screwed. I mean, there's prostitutes for that. So it's not technical in celibacy. Okay, so I hope I didn't lose your train of thought, because I just lost mine. So you take it from there.
Yeah, it's and what we're doing is we're expecting women to show the same level of agency that it took men thousands and thousands of years to achieve. And we're expecting them to show that over a course of 2 or 3 generations.
Well, it's perfect, and one of the things as you were talking that that popped into my head is that, you know, I don't really know what level of agency that a young woman, a pre-married, still living at home agency, what agency she really possesses. But it's not really an important question, because she has agents. She has her family, her father's, her village. Shout out to Hillary there. It takes a village, right?
Takes a village to get a woman married correctly.
Yeah. So, but anyway, the thing that what offends me oftentimes when I hear the feminists blather on and on is that the woman never is really her own or herself, or she doesn't get to develop. And I say, once she does go off, presumably to start a family, that's when her agency begins, and they're damn good at it, right?
Yeah.
When it's in that context,
especially when they have children,
yes.
It does something to a woman's mind. It's like they evolve a lot.
Uh-huh.
Their ability to have agency changes after that. If they have a son, they actually end up with some of his and their husband's DNA in their brain, which changes some parts of their brain to think like a man. So their agency increases in that way as well. But it's not just women who are often lacking in agency. A large number of men are lacking in agency as well, because previous to the more recent times, we didn't live in this atomized, separated culture where everyone is on their own. You know, there would always be some men who would go out to frontiers and explore things and be away from civilization. But that was a fairly small minority. You know, most men lived in a very tight-knit community and a structure, and they knew exactly what was expected of them. So even amongst men, the level of agency that's currently being expected is often unrealistic, but certainly for women. And it's cruel to them. Look, 50% of women are on psychotropic drugs, like mind-altering drugs for depression.
Paxil, Xanax, all those things.
Exactly. What's happened is their bad behavior was a rebellion against being given too much freedom. And the depression is what happened when they realized we weren't going to do anything about it. That's what's happened. Now, the problem with feminists is they want women, they say they want women to have all the agency of a man, but then they have none of the accountability
or responsibility, and they're not taking, and they don't want to take on the responsibilities.
Yes,
in many cases.
Well, a lot of people say, well, when I say that, you know, women have less agency on average than men, what they'll say to me is, and this is the problem, they'll go right away to a binary again. Then you're taking away all their responsibility, and all their consequences. The reality is you can't make anyone have agency. So I can't take away someone's agency. They have it. The only way I can take away their agency is to physically impact their ability to exercise agency. But they will exercise what agency they choose to exercise, and there's nothing I can do about it.
It's kind of what agency means, right?
Exactly. And I think this is the old Stoic idea that a lot of the world's unhappiness comes from our attempts to control things that are out of our control, while ignoring things that are in our control. So our own agency is in our control. We can influence our immediate friends and family, but we can't control how much agency women in the world show. We can perhaps create a structure again where women, their lack of agency is not such a big problem, but we can't force them to show agency. And this is what feminists have attempted to do, tried to put them in a position where they were forced to show agency. The results have been tragic, destroying to our society. But there's another little wrinkle in this. Oh, I meant to cover the part about responsibility. The fact is when women whether you have agency or not, and you take an action, you bear all the responsibility for that action. If a dog bites me and I shoot the dog, nobody says, you know, you shouldn't have shot the dog. It didn't have any agency. It didn't know it wasn't supposed to bite you. I'm like, no, I don't care. It's a danger to me and I shot it.
Yeah.
Groups of people who have low agency and do dangerous things will end up with consequences, irregardless of whether they have agency. In fact, the consequences could be worse. The problem is, in the West, we have tried to paper over women's lack of agency with welfare and family court systems. And we've tried to make it so they could function without agency, but get all the benefits of having agency.
Okay, it's the thing that I use all the time. I think hardly a day goes by where I don't talk about the cake and eat it too aspect of feminism. You know, heads you win, tails I lose, or whichever way it goes. And this is a direct. In economic terms, it's like I want all of the profits, but I don't want to bear any of the costs.
Yeah, and what happens is all it does is defer. So if we have, we would like to see everyone have a great, wonderful life, but some people who refuse to show agency or can't, they're going to have lethal consequences. You know, until the formation of the welfare state, if you didn't feed your kids, they starved to death. That's just the way it was. Maybe the church would look after them, but even then, a society couldn't function if enough parents decided to take their responsibility. And we are attempting to paper over not just women, but all people who have lack of agency. We're attempting to paper over that with welfare states and mass immigration, bringing these people into our countries, hoping we can somehow correct the mistakes that they're making. And this hubris is just going to make us feel the pain of it too, because what we're doing is the punishments that people get, or the consequences that people have from not showing agency, are natural consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Those are natural. We don't need to create consequences. There are natural consequences not showing agency. When we attempt to fight natural law, when we attempt to go against natural law, what happens is they still get burned, and we get burned too.
Right.
Because we're breaking the natural law.
Well, this is an interesting thread ways back where you said that, when we started to talk about how people, they want this. So developing that a little bit more is, so there's a sense I'm getting that, okay, take any given individual and you could analyze them and say, well, you have this agency, this agency, this agency, or you have the power of agency here, here, and here, and you don't have it here, here, and here. But yet the person, through whatever fault, I don't know, maybe you can speak to that, through whatever fault, they don't exercise the powers that they do have, but then they beat their head against the wall and rail, or go out and demonstrate, or they get tats and piercings or whatever to mourn all of the powers of agency that they don't have. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So potential agency, the maximum agency that you can show, is really an irrelevant measure for us. It is for the individual. I want to know how much agency I can show and how I can maximize it. But I don't care how much agency my neighbor can show. All I care is how much agency he actually shows. My neighbor can be nice to me or not. I only care what they actually do. Their potential is irrelevant to me. On a grander scale, for public policy issues, sometimes it's necessary to give a thought to a group of people's average ability to show agency. But one-on-one, like if you meet a woman who demonstrates low agency behavior, does it matter if she's doing that in rebellion against her father or if she actually has low agency? Who cares? It's the behavior that matters. And we can't, once you've demonstrated low agency behavior long enough, it may actually retard your behavior. The same as if you take drugs, it'll lower your IQ. If you live as if you have no agency, a good example of that is a study that was done a few years back that said that on average, gay men had a shrunken, I think it's the hypothalamus. It's this part of the brain here, which is the self-control center. So they said it was on average about 20 to 30% smaller than the average population. And that was because they had been engaging in behavior in which they didn't show self-control for long periods of time, and that part of the brain atrophied. And we know this physically. If we don't exercise, we atrophy, and then our potential is reduced. And if you want to be healthy at 70, you got to be exercising at 30. Okay, so this is pretty normal when we talk about physical things. But when we talk about intellectual capacities and agency, it also plays out. You know, if we don't use it, we lose it. And the same with men. You know, if you have men that don't show agency, if a man decides not to be responsible for himself, and he decides not to go and get a job, and he doesn't get into a position where he has some sort of hierarchy to climb, and he does that until he's 35 years old, and suddenly he says, "No, I want to grow up now."
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's going to take him seriously. Like I have no problem with a 20-year-old who has a lack of self-control and agency, because he's 20 and like, yeah, I can teach you what to do. If you're 35 and you have no agency, is there anything I can do? I don't know. Probably not.
And that's interesting too, because you begin to think about incarceration, for example. Let's pick out incarceration, right? And a lot of inmates are actually sort of A-type males, right? Right. They're, or, you know, I think probably maybe a little bit higher, but anyway, moving, so when you putting someone in prison is essentially an act of stripping away almost all agency, all agency that really matters in a social structure, right? And so they're there, it's called paying their debt to society. Well, you know, first of all, I think if you wrong somebody, you should pay your debt to them, right? Not this we the people versus. It should be, you know, Noah Revoy versus so and so.
The guy who stole my car.
What?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus the guy who stole my car, and what I want is my car back in compensation for my time.
Right. Exactly. So
I don't want him to go to jail.
So how could you possibly rehabilitate somebody if that is the goal? By incarcerating them and removing all agency for a period of 10 years, say 10 years. And they come out, they have no idea how to except, you know, for the rare outliers, or not a good idea of how to get back their agency, but in a properly directed way because they learned their lesson or whatever.
I'll give you an example. My impulse control. So if you're a prisoner, they tell you what to eat. They tell you when to get up, when to go to bed, when to go to the exercise yard, who you're allowed to be around. You don't get any temptation to develop impulse control over. Mm-hmm. And so your entire ability to develop impulse control goes away over time. There's a reason, big part of the reason men in prison are so violent is it's their only way to exercise their agency. It's the only thing they can do is attempt to climb a prison hierarchy. That's their only exercise of agency. And so they put all of their energy into that. You know, how do they control other people? Because they can't control themselves. And it's, if there is a continuation of this type of prison, there needs to be, and it needs to be part of the sentence or it'll never happen. Afterwards, let's say the last 10 or 20% of their sentence, they need to be put into, and a halfway house kind of does this, they need to be put into a situation where they can start to gain agency over time. Mm-hmm. And there should be actual programs of meditation should be in the prisons. There actually has been some prisons that have implemented that. Meditation, mindfulness, they need to be told the truth about agency. A big part of the problem is almost no one is telling the truth about agency. Most people just don't want to talk about it. The reality is that people with agency are dangerous to tyrannical governments because tyrannical governments want to take away your agency. If you like having agency, you're immediately dangerous. Look at the people that have that are more on the right, who are more interested in their own freedoms, for example. These individuals very often are people with high agency. And they're saying, I have the agency to look after myself. I don't need to be part of a program that helps people with low agency. And so they want to check out from that program. It's usually the people who want an end to the welfare state, who want an end to the family courts, are the people who don't need them because they can solve their own problems. And for prisoners, we need to teach them how to solve their problems. Yeah. I think it should be in school because parents aren't doing it, but you can't trust a government school with that level of responsibility.
Okay, so all right, that was great. So let's can you think of something that is the incarceration of women isn't an enormous societal problem,
because we don't hold them as having much agency. You commit a crime and you're a woman, like,
and we come full circle. And we come full circle.
You're probably just having some PMS, and that's why you killed him.
Okay? Yeah. Right.
Now, in a world where men could, woman hits me, I'm going to hit her back. Like, it's just the way it is. She wants to show that level of agency that she thinks she can fight with me. I'm going to fight her back, and I'm going to treat her with all the equality that she's asking for. But if men do that, we can get in a lot of trouble too.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Of course, if women knew that there was consequences for their actions, they would be more likely to display more agency. What we're doing, though, by not allowing women to have equal sentences is we're reducing the natural consequences for their behavior. Right. So normally when women commit crimes, the natural consequence for their behavior, what kind of crimes do women commit? So a lot of it is crimes against children. Normally, the father would be the one who would demand justice, and he would do the justice by his own hand in the past. Mm-hmm. And so even then, there has always been a tremendous amount of violence of women against their own children. Yes. And that is, women have never been held accountable for that. Mm-hmm. The only people that sometimes hold them accountable is their own children when they grow up, but otherwise it never happens. But we never treat women with the same agency as men. And until recently, it wasn't as much of a problem because we also made sure that they had that structure around them.
Okay, so now one of the things that people see once they see the blog posts, of course, you do private consulting of both men and women in loosely stated relationships, right? Seeking relationships or preserving them, or perhaps sometimes how to get out of them.
Yeah, sometimes absolutely. There are people in toxic relationships and they feel trapped, and mm-hmm. they need help to exercise their ability to get out of those relationships. And a lot of, the vast majority of my clients, when they come to me, they want to do is make their life better. And for a large portion of them, the biggest problem they have is that they don't really love themselves. They don't have enough care and consideration for themselves. And because of that, everyone knows how to lose weight. Everyone knows how to get fit. Everyone knows how to go out and talk to women. You just literally go out where they physically are and you speak to them. And if you make a fool of yourself, who cares? You just try another woman. But to actually go out and do that means you have to care enough about yourself and your long-term future to go out and do that. And that's building that care and consideration through mindfulness and through talking with people about why they should love themselves. It's very important. And for a lot of women, what I'm providing is a surrogate to that masculine structure that they unfortunately don't have in their life. Someone to tell them, yes, your irrational desires are because you're a woman, and it's perfectly fine that you have those irrational desires, but let's talk about them and figure out how we can, because you can't satisfy them. They're just there because you're a woman. And the desire for women desire both drama and security at the same time, for example. And I explained to them, that's natural for a lot of women, because we've been lying to women for close to 100 years now about what femininity in women and their own behavior. We've been telling them they're men. They're just men with breasts. And that's not true. And if we tell them the truth about who they are and that they need structure and that they need order and organization in their life, because that's not natural for women to create that on their own, that does a whole lot for their psychological health. It makes them better able to act in their own life.
That's so yes. So they need So what you're, I hate to go Kathy Newman on you and say, so what you're saying is, um,
So what you're saying is lobsters should rule the world.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I think what I'm hearing is that you, I keep laughing when I say it. Sorry. It's you. That's interesting. We've lied to women, right? It deceived them. Why? Why do you say?
Because we were lazy. We got to a point where life got so good that we didn't need women to fulfill their particular role that they were fulfilling in the same way that we needed it before. Now, part of this was, if you go back far enough, there are some disturbing roots to this. So if you read the book, The Origins of War in Child Abuse, they explain that if you go back before, I think it's the 1740s or something like this, that the average family would have something like 5 boys and 2 girls, which meant there was a huge shortage of women. And that was because mothers were killing the excess daughters since they weren't economically productive. My 5-year-old son can probably already pull a plow. He's built like a bulldog. But a 5-year-old girl is going to be more dainty and not able to do that. And maybe she's not ever able to be fully economically productive. And people were all on the verge of starvation. So the mothers would literally kill their daughters. It's horrible to think about this.
Infanticide goes way back. A lot of cultures practiced it. You know, it's just a fact, right?
But what would happen is that as boys grew up, they realized somewhere around 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, as they hit puberty, it got more intense, that there's not enough girls to go around, and I better eliminate some of these other guys before I get too far. Yeah. And therefore, we have all the violence in Western culture, and the wars that we had, and men not particularly caring if they lived and died, only caring if they were successful. And we have all of the adventures that the explorers went on, and that actually shaped Western man's heroic notion of himself, was because it was either success or die physically or die genetically. It doesn't matter, you're going to die. And so for around that period of time in the West, food became abundant enough, and also there were some social changes where people stopped doing that, or at least mostly stopped. And so the gender ratios evened out. And now we kind of have a situation where there's a lot more nice women, good women out there than there are good men right now. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of men are getting lazy and not setting boundaries as they should. To be a patriarch, to be a man, a real man, and set boundaries for your family and for yourself, first of all, and for your family, and have that level of agency, there is a shockingly small number of men that have that capacity. Mm-hmm. And I think, I'm trying to teach more men to be able to do that, so that more men can, without the structures we used to have, can at least still raise their families, and maybe we recreate this for our children's generation. But there's a lack of men willing to tell the truth to women. I think that maybe in the last 5 or 6 years is starting to really come out. And there's a lot of young men that are really angry at women. And if they can understand that the solution to the problems with women is just telling them the truth. The truth is plenty of an argument. Women know what they want. Women who think about it are unhappy with the level of chaotic freedom that they have. They want freedom, but within a safe structure. Mm-hmm. With men, we want to go out in the rickety boat in the ocean and face the elements and potentially die. We love that level of adventure. That freaks women out. Mm-hmm. I have women tell me all the time that the level of freedom that they have is way too high, and they wish that they had more guidance. And by that, they mean boundaries on their behavior. They want to be free to operate within safe bounds. And we need to create that again for women. And it doesn't need to be every single man, because a lot of men aren't going to be capable. But if 5 to 10% of men start to make these bounds, other men will be obligated to do it in order to get a good woman. And
Where?
it will.
Go ahead. Finish, please.
I'm done.
Okay. So where? Um, okay. Actually, two things. So in the early, I guess you're going back to the early 1900s with the suffragettes, and not sure. So if most women want this more traditional boundary structure, even if they can't state it in those explicit terms, then where does the women's movement rise from? Where does it come from?
Well, the idea of feminism. So we'll say that it's not the women's movement. It's been feminism. And we don't want to paint all women like that as being feminist for sure, since many of them reject the label. But the feminist movement comes out of, it was one of the facets of communistic thought that goes back to the 19th century. And one of those was, basically their question was, how do we destroy the West? And I don't think they saw where feminism was going, but we do know that in societies where women have higher agency, they have less children.
Mm-hmm.
In societies where they have less agency, they have more children. So the exact matchup between that. And I think the thought was, let's control population by giving women an opportunity to have more agency. And now they're going to want to have less children, which actually happened to a large extent. Mm-hmm. And now that's going to weaken the West. Smaller families, they won't cooperate with if you have a big family, the women have to cooperate. Your community of women have to cooperate. They can't raise 10 kids by themselves. They need the help of the others. And it will break down the family and the community. A lot of people don't realize how destructive feminism was to the community itself. Women were a kind of substructure amongst the small town communities, and they kept, they would help the men work out problems between each other. They would make sure that the kids got a chance to socialize, and they made they worked within the boundaries. The boundaries that the men had set, this is the village, they worked in there and made lots of wonderful things happen. And they had a lot of power within those boundaries. And I think that the attempt was to completely isolate women and destroy the family and Western civilization. And this is one of the aspects of it, is feminism. It is not a Western idea. It's not an idea that comes from our people. It comes from outside. And it's repugnant to the vast majority of women. They really don't. If you really talk about what feminism is, most women don't want it. If you talk about feminists, say, oh, equality and blah, 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 blah. Some women will be like, yeah, that sounds good. But basically they say it's good stuff, feminism good, not feminism bad. Mm-hmm. And so women will say, no, they'll agree with that. But if you talk to them about the consequences and you ask them, are you happy with this? Do you want your husband to take less of a lead and have you make more decisions in the family? Virtually no woman goes, oh yeah, I want to make more decisions in my family.
Okay.
I want to take the lead. That sounds great.
All right. So, but that's good. I'm good to hear. And that's my experience too. I don't know, it's like, have I been living in a cave? Because when I actually go out and talk to women, right? I mean, yeah, you can get a little trigger action going here and there every once in a while, but it's nothing like what you see blown out of proportion. And when I talk to women, I seem to end up talking to women who are pretty traditional minded. They don't want to be beaten, and for sure.
Well, that was never traditional in the West. That's not a white Western European cultural tradition, beating our women.
Yeah.
I remember talking to old men, and they said in their village, pre-Second World War, in their village, if you hit your wife, her brothers would come
take
you out to the woods and have a long discussion with you that you wouldn't appreciate. And you would never do it again. Because if the second time you did it, she'd become a widow.
Not battering women is a Western idea. I mean, exactly. Really. Okay, so, but here's the thing. and I don't know whether it's just stupid virtue signaling or if that's the simple thing, but I end up talking to more dudes who are pussy minded as all get. I can't even believe it. Right?
Yeah.
It's like they've taken over the cheerleading for feminism. You want to address that?
Yeah. This is part of the problem. You see, women understand women better than than most young men. Okay. Generally, if you're a young woman between 16 to 20, you're not interested in a guy 16 to 20, because what has he got to offer you? He's got nothing. He's probably not even got a job nowadays. And so you're looking at guys that are 5 to 10, 15 years older than you. And so guys that are 15 years older, they know what they want. They want feminine women. So women are less likely to adopt feminist ideas because it makes them unappealing to the group of men that they're interested in dating. Plus, it doesn't make them comfortable. They just don't like it. But if you're a 17, 18, 20-year-old guy, you're just in college and you've got nothing to offer, maybe the only thing you can offer is acting like a woman too. Maybe what women want is me to act exactly like a woman.
Yeah.
It repels women. Women are absolutely repulsed by those kind of men. You'd be surprised how many men, their female friends, assumed they were gay.
Yeah.
It's really, really sad. And the reality is, if you're a man, the more benevolently you dominate women and everyone around you, the more attractive you become to women. Mm-hmm. They do not like male feminists. Male feminists are as attractive to women as large blue-haired feminists are attractive to men.
Yeah.
About the level of attraction. And what's amazing is, you got to understand, there's been trillions and trillions of dollars of propaganda over several generations promoting feminism, and now it's shifted to promoting anti-masculinity. I think that only happened maybe about 15 years ago.
Toxic masculinity.
Yeah. And the only kind of masculinity that's toxic is the absence of it.
Right.
It's toxic the way oxygen is toxic. You die without it. Society collapses without masculinity. We need femininity too. It doesn't mean femininity is less valuable. And in fact, the more masculinity we have in society, and this is part of the reason.
The more femininity you have.
Exactly. They've gone after the men. They've gone after the men because they realized that we were stimulating the women towards being more feminine by our masculinity.
Okay. So we're coming up on about an hour here. So let's cover one more thing though. Give us your, from your experience in your coaching, both males and females, what women do you want to, this for the guys, what women do you want to stay away from? What are your big 3 or 6 or whatever? And then same thing on the other side of the table.
Women who do not respect masculinity. So you can find this out pretty easily. So you ask a woman, so who's the most important man in your life? And if she's got no men in her life, or she complains about men, if she complains to you about men at any point in your relationship, that's the end. General complaint about men or masculinity. She needs to respect masculinity, or she will not respect you unless you become basically a woman as well. Unless you castrate yourself, she won't respect you. That's a horrible life. You don't want that. I would say the second one is that she respects femininity as well. So she needs to be as feminine as possible. That's in her demeanor, in her actions, in the way she moves her body, the way she dresses, the way she treats other people. Is she caring, and is she feminine in her approach? And I think the third one is, if you're wanting to avoid women, is avoiding women who do not understand themselves, who have no self-knowledge whatsoever. I'm much more appreciative of a woman who says, I have low agency and I know it and I need a man to tell me what to do, than a woman who says, no, I can do everything a man can do. Watch me fail every time I try.
Hubris.
Yeah. Hubris. Humility in men and women is very useful. The humility to understand where you actually are. Humility is not thinking less of yourself than you really are. It's thinking accurately about yourself. I know I don't go into the gym and lift twice the weight I can and break my back and never lift again. That would be foolish. Instead, I will make slow incremental improvements, and that way I get stronger. And all of us can do the same thing. You want a woman who has some level of humility, or at least is not soaked with hubris. That's terrible.
Good. Okay, so now for the men, for the women, what men do you wish to avoid?
You want to look to a man who is masculine, and you're not going to be a very good judge of that. Women are not particularly good judges of men. What they should do is judge the man's peer group. So if a man, for example, if all of his peers are man whores and or liars or drug addicts, and he says, "Oh, I'm none of those things, but my 5 best friends are. I'm not." Then he's also a liar then. And so you can judge a man a lot by his peer group. This is why it's important for young men to have a male peer group, because you will be judged by the company you keep. Mm-hmm. And also, how is he treated within the group? Is he treated like the unwanted member? Is he treated like an important, valuable part of the group? Or is maybe he's treated like the alpha of the group? This is going to tell you a lot about the man. Mm-hmm. And it's also it's always concerning if a man can't go into a peer group. He wants to and can't get into any peer groups or form one himself, because if you can't be friends with a man, you're never going to figure out how to be a good mate to a woman either. Mm-hmm. You need to be able to be a friend. So look for these men that are stay away from men that are completely isolated. I will be frank, I would stay away from men that are physically, I wouldn't say physically weak necessarily, but are really out of shape. Mm-hmm. The reason is they don't yet love themselves enough to take care of their body. And if they can't take care of their body, if they can't love themselves enough for that, they're not going to love you very much either.
Right.
That's why men, number one thing, get to the gym.
Okay. One final thing, because the last time we spoke, and the link is going to be in there so people can go back and see our other conversation. But one of the things we talked about in the context of dating was the dating apps. And what you've just told me, it reminded me of that previous conversation about what an advantage women have in it, but also what a disadvantage men have. Because for a man, if you're looking to weed out stuff, so say in the connections you get, you could a few questions and you can start to figure out these big things that you don't want, right? Move on, yep. Right? But for the woman, she can find a man, but there's no way she's going to know how he is in real life. In particular, how he's viewed in his family, in his friendship circles, perhaps at work, and where he is, and how he is regarded. Because that's kind of what they're looking for. Is what I'm getting from you is it's very important to them, his standing amongst other people. What do other people, and not just men, but men and women, are they, is he, if he walks into a room, do people start coming up and asking him questions, stuff like that, stuff that show that he's obviously a dominant sort of personality. She ain't going to get that off of a dating app.
No, exactly.
Actually, you're going to have to spend some time and go into social situations where he's amongst his peers.
This is why men should grab women and take them to their social places. You've got like a pub you like to hang out at, or some sort of a group. Maybe you belong to a social group and a men's group, and you have a place where you hang out that's allowed to bring women, and take her there. Mm-hmm. Take her around your buddies. What I tell men is for first dates, you go, yeah, me and my buddies are going to such and such a place, and afterwards I'm going to have coffee. Would you like to, or before, I'm going to have coffee and then I'm going to go meet some of my friends afterwards. Would you like to come and have coffee with me? You don't want to spend a lot on a first date.
Right.
It doesn't make a difference in impressing. And actually you're trying to figure out if she's impressive, not the other way around.
Right.
And if you like her, if the coffee date goes well, take her to meet your friends immediately. Because your friends are going to tell you what they think.
Yeah.
You know?
And then she's going to see you in action.
She's going to see you in action. It's that mix. You get the advantage, and so does she.
All right, so I guess we've done a pretty good hour here. I like that kind of length because then people might watch it who are new to it. Yeah. And so, okay, so what I'm going to do is get right on this and process it. Hopefully it'll be up later today, a blog post and everything. I like to get these things out right away. And so, Noah, I really thank you for joining us. Again, give us your website.
Thanks, Richard. My website is smv4k.com. That's sexual market value for K-selected people.
And you also have a Facebook presence, but they can find you through your website.
If you go onto our website, you'll see our Patreon as well, and that allows you to then get in the Facebook. The Facebook's only for paid members because I really keep control over that. That's there's actually 3 groups. There's one for men, one for women, and a mixed group, and I have spent some time on that, so I definitely support the Patreon.
Okay, great. All right, Noah, thanks a lot for joining me, and we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you, Richard. It was excellent.